Welcome to this video on the Wara channel. Today we're going to follow up with the last video on this channel, which is how to develop the city power of telepathy. And today we're going to talk about the reason why you want to develop the city power of telepathy. Okay, realistically, telepathy is a clumsy method of communication. Okay, language is a very quick and easy way. The effort required with telepathy is considerable. Okay, there are ways to develop that so that the effort becomes less considerable through practice. Okay, so but when you're looking at telepathy, for example, if you're trying to do telepathy at the same time as you're having a conversation out loud, it's difficult to focus on both things at the same time. Telepathy is also awkward in the sense that it doesn't work in that way where you're having a direct conversation that the other person is necessarily aware of 100%. Okay, you're communicating to their systems. Okay, and basically you're communicating information back and forth, but depending on the awareness of the other being. Okay, they also may need to focus on that, so it may be in a way an unaware communication on their behalf. Okay, one way to see it is that it's easier to communicate to some beings telepathically and efficiently than others. So in some ways, depending on the development of the other being, it can be more difficult. So it's an inefficient way to communicate. Okay, it's an imperfect way to communicate, and some people can develop it to a higher degree, with time. And there are different reasons for developing it as well. But why do you want to develop it from a spiritual perspective? Why does it exist, telepathy, as a city power? Okay, and the reason is because there are different levels of commitment to deities. Okay, and deities, that do not exist in body necessarily at this time, okay, can be difficult to communicate with, right? And an efficient way to communicate with them is through telepathy. Okay, and as you basically communicate with a deity, and basically move forward in your spiritual practice by receiving direct communication through telepathy from that deity, okay, it's a way of opening yourself up to further propelling yourself spiritually. So you see that the city power, the real reason for the city power, is not necessarily to have an efficient talk telepathically with your neighbor, but more specifically, to communicate in ways when verbal communication is not possible at that time. Okay, another way is see it as very convenient for communicating over long distances. Okay, it's a little bit like a telephone. Okay, someone who has telepathy can pick up a telephone and talk to someone else somewhere else in the world. Okay, and that person, depending on their ability, might be conscious of that communication or less conscious of that communication. Okay, so telepathy is used in that sense, and in that same sense, you can use telepathy not just to talk to someone who's in body. You can use telepathy to talk to a deity, okay, to a specific form of God. You can even use telepathy to talk to God if God feels like responding. Okay, so telepathy follows the same channels, essentially. Okay, the same communication networks that exist within the system and the computer program in which we all exist as communication systems follows the structure. Okay, there are channels that prayers to God follows. So the communication channels where thoughts are projected. Okay, and basically telepathy can be directed to a specific individual. In fact, it should be. You should know who you're talking to, right? And that's part of that development of telepathy, learning how to use those communication channels to communicate to another being, right? So you can use that technique to basically develop that ability within your mind, right? The ability to use telepathy. So now you can basically go to a temple, for example, and as you're basically moving from one deity to the next, within that temple, you can not only stand in front of them and talk to them, you can also hear back from them. So there's that idea that gods don't talk back to us. They can if you develop the ability to talk at their level, right? And to use the communication systems that they work with. So basically, you can have a conversation with a deity, and that's why you want to develop telepathy as a city, because there's some levels, you'll get to some levels of your practice where the next advancement in your spiritual practice might require some words of guidance in your story from a deity or from someone else, from a higher being, right? And that higher being, to get that message efficiently from them, you can develop telepathy, so you can have a direct communication, right? A direct exchange of thoughts, with sending a message and receiving a response in real time with that deity. Okay, so as you move to higher levels of spirituality, we've talked about the different levels of commitment to a deity, and as you commit to a different deity, what you're really doing within the computer system in which you exist, the program in which we exist, what you're really doing is you're moving your functions that you represent in body, right? You're the god of a certain functions, you direct certain functions. You're moving your functions under the directorship of a higher being that has likely more developed functions, right? So what you're doing is, and basically as a being, all beings who function under priorities, right, which come from the enlightened beings, right? People are color-coded, if you want to see it that way, and that is an appropriate way of seeing things, right? So basically, when you practice sadhana, when you become an upasaka of another deity, you might have been under another deity. You might not have been aware of it at one point. Okay, your functions fell within the directorship of a higher being. Okay, and then consciously, okay, you move to another being, or maybe you confirm to the same being that you're in the right place with that higher being, and you trust in them to guide you and develop you and to help guide you and be your elder, if you want, as a system. Okay, and guide you in your growth. Okay, so basically, as you move from one deity, you become an upasaka of another deity, you basically move your systems under their directorship and under their growth, and you basically put your trust in them. So maybe you move once or twice in your life from one deity to another, become an upasaka of another deity, or maybe you stay with the one that you were already falling under, and as things are in your practice, maybe your practice leads you to introducing yourself to that deity in person and being in your lifetime, and then committing them in your second stage of commitment to a deity, and then potentially one day, you never know, even maybe marrying the deity, having a marriage at the level of the name, or a marriage at different levels. Okay, so a combining of the functions and directorship of those functions. So there's different levels of commitment to a deity. And what happens is when you move from it, it's basically from a systems view, basically from a system, looking at it from code, your system falls under another system. So it's a reorganization of the system. So as you develop in your spiritual practice as a system, you may determine, or feel essentially that you would be better under the direction of another deity. Okay, you get pulled to another deity, if you want to see it that way, right? Life pulls you towards another deity, your path pulls you towards another deity, and that's you as a system basically understanding who you are and understanding where you fit in really, what's your path, what's your right path for you. So it's basically the system becoming more efficient, right? Basically putting other systems under other directions, a reorganization of the system to become more efficient for the growth of creation. So you may find another path that's better suited towards you. So as a system, you move under them. Okay? So telepathy allows you to communicate with those beings and expands your experience, your conscious experience, right? And basically allows you to propel yourself forward in different levels spiritually. As you can now telepathically speak to another being, okay, that you would not be able to get a message back with your ears, if you want to look at it that way, because the being's not necessarily physically in front of you in form at that time. Okay, so telepathy allows you to progress in your spiritual journey, and that's why it exists as a city. Okay, and all the cities serve as tools to be used. Okay, so it's not appropriate to say that city powers are a distraction. Okay, you can see it that way if you're just in it for power. It's a distraction for sure, because you're missing the idea that where you want to be is you want to be an enlightened being that uses his city powers to help the world, to help creation, to help himself and creation, to uphold the Dharma. Okay, so that's what city powers exist for. And as you propel yourself in your spiritual journey, as you grow, you will develop the different city powers, and they will have their different applications at different stages of your journey to help you in your journey, right? To help propel you forward and to help propel creation forward. So no, don't get distracted and becoming an evil being that's developed some powers and you use your powers for evil. That's not the point, right? The point is to use them for the Dharma, right? So we already talked about this channel that you're better off being a good being than a bad being. Okay, you don't want to become an asura, and if you're an asura, you know, you want to remember the light again and move back towards the light, because you know there are beauties in this world that can be remembered, even if you've taken the path of darkness. Okay. So, all that to say, why you develop telepathy as a city, why would you practice that? Because it allows you to communicate with your deity. Okay, as an upasaka, it allows you to communicate directly with your deity and with other beings as well that you might encounter on your spiritual path. Okay, so as you develop city powers, you develop essentially a power that the gods have, right? And that's one of the methods that they communicate with each other, is using the strings that connect all things. Think string theory, okay? And using those strings to communicate meshes, to communicate with each other. Okay, so telepathy is a very useful tool, but also a very limited tool, because it's not as efficient as having a conversation. You know, it takes more effort for an embodied being, you know, to talk, for example, in that way. You know, but then again, you know, I think it's an effort worth taking if it allows you to communicate with your deity, okay, to which you committed or introduce yourself to. Right? So as you move in those higher levels of spiritual practice, you will develop that city power. And the reason for that is so that you can get better guidance from those higher systems that guide you, right? That direct you, your deity, right? In that way. So some people in some cultures, you know, they get, they believe in going directly to God. Some people believe in going direct to other deities, you know. Basically, maybe God's very busy. You know, you can do whichever one you prefer. You know, there's no bad way of doing things. All cultures, traditions, religions, and faiths are valid, and they all have their truth. They're all the truth, okay? And all the truth comes together. There are different facets of ways of seeing things, of approaching God, of having a relationship with God, okay? But they all have the same message: to treat your neighbor like you'd want to be treated and to be a good person, right? So you see really that message of God that follows continuity within all the traditions, cultures, and religions of the world. Okay, so why do you want to develop the telepathy when you get to those stages? It allows you to basically communicate to deities. And as you further discover your path and who you are and advance in Zen Wara practice, the practice of yoga, the practice of the first Warren, okay, the first Shetram, okay, at that point, what you want to think is you think that that can be used as a tool to have a direct communication with that deity. Okay, so you can develop it with that purpose, and that's a good reason to develop it. Developing it to have control over other people, using it to have control over people, that's not a proper application of telepathy. Okay, you know, and that's not the same thing. Controlling someone and talking to them is not the same thing as well. You know, that's a different application, and those kinds of things can be done as well with other kinds of practices. And you know, leave those things to God. You know, if someone needs to go control someone and intervene in their life, you know, leave that to God to make that intervention. You know, you're not properly informed, okay, probably about the circumstances, and maybe you shouldn't be trying to impose your will on someone else. You know, but when you talk about sharing the light of God with someone, right? You know, don't think doing it through telepathy necessarily. Think about having a good conversation over dinner. You know, a good conversation over coffee and saying, you know, have you heard of Zen Wara? Have you heard of the Sri Satguru? Have you heard of the Kalki avatar that has come? You know, of Vishnu, of Shiva, the Trimurti avatar that represents all the higher functions of God that's come to give this message, okay? And have you thought about practicing yoga? Okay, practicing meditation, okay? You know, you look, it doesn't hurt to be informed. Check him out. Check out his channel, you know. Maybe that's not the path for you. There's no problem with taking another path, but it's also good to be informed about the truths of God. Okay, and the reason that there's so many different paths, some paths that are more soft, some paths that are more fierce, okay, is that different paths suit different people, different types of beings that represent different types of functions, okay? And as you move, for example, from one deity, one path to the next, right, you move your systems under the guidance and directions and growths of another system, okay, in this system, in this creation, okay? Maybe you do find that path that is better suited for you, okay? But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be informed about other paths, right? Because you should be informed about all the different facets of God, and it becomes a fascinating journey as well. Okay, so I hope that this can give some joy and some amusement and some fun to your life as well, because there's no reason that spirituality has to just be serious, okay, and painful. It should be a fun experience. It should be an enjoyable experience, an experience of discovery, of discovering yourself and of all life, the truths of life, the truth of God, and that you are a being of God, and that you are a God in your own sense when you discover it and remember it, and you develop your abilities, establish yourself in this creation as a living God, as a walking God, a God that walks the earth, practitioner of Wara. Okay, so I hope you've liked this channel, okay, and understand a little bit more the reason why these cities exist, okay, as tools to further yourself on the spiritual journey. Thanks for listening.